The studio was already tense, but when Denzel Washington leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked on Trump, you could feel the air thicken. The host hadn't even finished the question. It didn't matter. Denzel had come with something to say, and he wasn't going to wait for a green light. "Let me get this straight," Denzel said, his voice steady, sharp. "You scream about real Americans, yet you marry a woman who needed a visa just to stand next to you on stage. And now you want to talk about border policy like you're the face of purity?" Trump's mouth twitched. The audience didn't know whether to gasp or cheer, but half of them did both. Melania, seated off-camera, reportedly stiffened in her chair. But Denzel wasn't finished. Not even close. "I'm sick of the double standards," he continued. "You demonize immigrants on Monday, and by Friday, you're posing for gala photos with one. Which is it, Donald? Is immigration the problem, or is the problem that it doesn't fit your brand of power?" Trump leaned into the mic, jaw clenched. "Watch your tone," he said. "That's my wife you're talking about." But Denzel didn't blink. "You made her a political token. I'm talking about that." Boom. The crowd erupted. The camera cut to the moderator, who looked like he regretted even inviting them on the same panel. But it was too late. Denzel had set the tone, and this wasn't going to be a polite exchange of opinions. This was a reckoning. Trump tried to pivot, turning the conversation to jobs, to China, to the deep state. But the damage was done. His base saw a man squirming. The rest of the world saw a man being held accountable. And just as the segment was about to cut to commercial, Denzel dropped the line that would be replayed millions of times across social media. "Don't preach patriotism with one hand and sign green cards with the other. Either mean what you say, or shut up." Fade to black, the studio was frozen. Denzel's voice didn't waver, not for a second. He wasn't raising it, he didn't have to. It was the sharpness in his tone, the precision in his words. "You preach patriotism, but you married a woman who didn't speak English until years into your presidency," he said, locking eyes with Trump. "You want to deport others for the same thing?" Trump's face twitched. His jaw tightened. The camera zoomed in. Melania, sitting quietly off to the side of the stage, looked like a porcelain statue, unmoving, unreadable. "Don't you dare bring my wife into this," Trump snapped, pointing at Denzel. "This is low, even for a Hollywood actor." Denzel didn't flinch. "No, what's low," he shot back, "is building a political brand on fear and walls while your own household doesn't fit the narrative you peddle." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Commentators at the panel table looked nervously at each other. The moderator, clearly losing control, tried to interject, "Let's keep this respectful." But Denzel leaned in. "You call others illegal. You dehumanize families at the border. Yet the woman you hold up as First Lady came here the same way they did, on hope. But she got a gold elevator instead of a cage." Trump stood up. "That's enough." The audience was split, half stunned, half erupting in applause. A chant of "Let him speak" broke out. Melania's expression hadn't changed, but her eyes flicked to the side, toward a backstage exit. And Denzel? He didn't back down. "You want to play the patriot? Then live like one. Don't pick and choose whose dreams are valid." Cameras caught every frame. Twitter exploded. The moment was no longer just a debate, it was a reckoning. Trump's hands clenched the edges of his podium. "You know what your problem is," he said, trying to steady his voice. "You pretend to care. You say things that sound noble, but you live in mansions, attend galas, and fly private while scolding Americans who are just trying to protect their country." Denzel blinked slowly. "You're confusing protecting the country with performing for a base," he replied. "I speak out because I can afford to. That's the whole point. Those who can speak, must. I don't hide behind walls, I face truth head-on." The tension thickened. Camera crews whispered into their headsets, catching every twitch of Trump's scowl and Denzel's icy calm. "Tell me this," Denzel continued, stepping forward, voice unwavering. "If Melania had shown up at the border today, no connections, no cameras, no Trump name, what would have happened to her under your policy?" Trump waved his hand dismissively. "That's hypothetical. Irrelevant." "It's not hypothetical to the thousands of women detained right now," Denzel shot back. "It's their reality. But when it's close to you, when it might touch your own house, you want the rules to bend." The room buzzed. The audience, silent at first, now murmured. Some were nodding. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Denzel wasn't done. "You call yourself a patriot," he said, pointing now, not out of rage, but clarity. "But a real patriot doesn't weaponize fear. A real patriot doesn't scapegoat immigrants while marrying one and turning her into a campaign prop." Trump lunged verbally. "You're a disgrace. You're attacking my wife because you know you can't attack my record." Denzel tilted his head. "Oh, I can attack your record. But the hypocrisy screams louder than the statistics. You preach values while stomping on them in Italian loafers." Gasps. Laughter. Shouts. The moderator tried again, "Gentlemen, please." But it was too late. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was a televised showdown. Trump leaned in, his voice rising just enough to sound commanding but not out of control, yet. "You don't get to stand there and lecture me, Denzel. You're an actor, not a policymaker. You live in a bubble of applause and fantasy. I deal in reality. And reality is, this country needs borders." Denzel stepped back, crossing his arms. "You deal in your version of reality, one that's broadcasted, branded, and bankrolled. But let's talk about the reality you've created. Families ripped apart. Kids in cages. Fear peddled like merchandise. And when someone questions it, suddenly, they're un-American." The audience shifted, unsure whether to clap or hold their breath. Even the camera operator zoomed in instinctively on Trump's expression, tight lips, flushed cheeks, jaw set. Trump barked, "I've done more for this country than you ever will. I made America strong again. While you, what do? Pretend to be someone else on screen?" Denzel didn't flinch. "Pretending is safer than lying. And I don't pretend to lead people, I lead by example." Trump threw up his hands, now clearly agitated. "You bring up my wife on national television like you know her. Like you know me." Denzel's voice lowered, but each word struck like a hammer. "I don't need to know her personally. What I know is the weaponization of fear, turning migrants into monsters, while the First Lady herself is an immigrant. That's not leadership. That's theater. And not the good kind. Leave Melania out of this." Trump thundered, red-faced now. "You're attacking her because you can't beat me." "I'm not attacking her. I'm exposing you," Denzel countered, eyes narrowing. "Your contradictions. Your cowardice. You talk about sending people back? Start with the parts of your heart that forgot compassion." The studio fell into stunned silence. A pin could have dropped between syllables. Then a woman in the crowd whispered, just loud enough to catch on a mic. "He's not acting." Trump turned to the moderator, his voice strained but sharp. "Are we going to let this continue? This man standing here slandering my wife, my family, on national television. That's beyond low. That's disgusting." The moderator started to interject, but Denzel raised a hand, calmly, confidently. "I'm not slandering anyone. I'm holding a mirror up, Mr. President. If the reflection burns, maybe it's the truth that's too hot to handle." Trump's hands gripped the podium. "You think you're brave because you say this on TV? Say it in real life. Say it at the border. Say it to the families who've lost everything. I've protected this country, while you made movies. Denzel's tone dropped to a measured, icy pace. You protected your ego. You protected your wealth. You protected power. But you didn't protect the soul of this nation. And you sure as hell didn't protect the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The camera cut to Melania in the audience, stone-faced, unmoving. Her expression unreadable. Unmoved? Or holding back? Then Trump snapped. You don't talk about my wife. She came here legally. She worked hard. She stayed quiet, unlike you. Denzel shook his head slowly, walking to the edge of the stage. And that's your issue, right? The silence. You expect silence from immigrants. From women. From anyone who doesn't fit your idea of what American looks or sounds like. But silence isn't strength, it's compliance. Trump surged forward, ignoring the camera crews trying to keep pace. You don't get to define patriotism. You're an actor with a script. I don't have a script, Denzel said firmly, eyes locked on Trump. But you? You've been reading the same lines for years: fear, division, ego. And guess what? The crowd's not buying it anymore. A beat of silence. Then applause. Not everyone, but loud enough to echo. Louder than Trump's voice. Louder than the script. And for a moment, just a moment, Trump looked small. Trump took a step back, adjusting his tie like it was a suit of armor he could still hide behind. You think you're some moral compass, Denzel? What gives you the right to lecture me, on what's American? Denzel leaned in, arms crossed, gaze unwavering. Being American isn't about where your wife was born, or how loud you shout at a podium. It's about living the values you preach. It's about integrity, something you've buried under golf courses and golden drapes. The audience stirred. A few murmurs, some laughter, nervous, unsure. But the tension in the room had shifted. No longer a celebrity showdown, this was becoming something more. A referendum. Trump's voice boomed. I brought jobs back. I strengthened the military. I stood up to China. You also stood on the graves of truth, Denzel replied. You mocked war heroes, danced around facts, and turned public service into personal profit. You played the presidency like a reality show, and the people were just your ratings. Trump's face reddened, pointing a finger across the stage. You're an actor. An entertainer. Stay in your lane. Funny, Denzel shot back. That's what they told civil rights leaders. That's what they told athletes who knelt for justice. Stay in your lane. But when the house is burning, I don't ask if the person holding the hose is a firefighter. I ask if they have the courage to put out the flames. Melania remained seated in the front row, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The cameras occasionally cut to her, but she offered no response. Just a faint twitch in her jaw. Was it anger? Embarrassment? Or was she listening, really listening? Trump gestured to the crowd now, pacing. This isn't your country to shame. I gave a voice to millions who were forgotten. And I'm reminding them not to forget the cost, Denzel said, firm. You shouted so loud, they mistook volume for vision. But now they see the wreckage in the daylight. Someone from the crowd yelled, let him finish. And just like that, the balance shifted. Denzel took a deep breath, allowing the silence to work in his favor. He scanned the room, not for applause, but for attention. America, he said slowly, is not a slogan on a red hat. It's not a brand. It's a promise. And you broke it. Trump clapped mockingly. Oh, bravo. Bravo. That was cute. Did you rehearse that between takes of your next flop movie? But the audience didn't laugh. They didn't cheer. Something had shifted. Even Trump's usual defenders seemed unsure whether this was still a game. "I don't rehearse truth," Denzel replied. "I live it. Unlike you, I don't need teleprompters or paid applause. I've walked through streets you've only ever flown over in your jet. I've talked to people you'd never look in the eye unless they worked at Mar-a-Lago." Trump's smile faded for a moment. "Watch your mouth." "No," Denzel said, stepping forward. "You watch your record. You separated families and called it policy. You praised dictators while silencing your own press. You mocked science, truth, and basic decency like they were enemies of your brand. And what have you done?" Trump snapped. "You make speeches. You play pretend for a living." "I show up," Denzel said. "In communities, in courtrooms, in classrooms. I don't need a title to lead. And I don't need a taxpayer-funded stage to tell the truth." A few people stood and clapped, not the orchestrated kind, but spontaneous. Raw. Real. Trump tried to speak, but Denzel cut him off, voice like a blade. "You claim to fight for the forgotten, but you forget them the second they stop clapping." From the wings, the moderator stepped in, nervously tugging at his earpiece. "Gentlemen, we need to." "No," Denzel said, eyes still locked on Trump. "He's run out of sound bites. Let him sit with the silence for once." And for the first time that night, Trump said nothing. The silence that followed Denzel's words was so thick it felt like oxygen had been sucked from the room. The lights, the cameras, even the breath of the audience, they all paused. Trump blinked. For once, his mouth hung open, searching for a comeback that wouldn't sound hollow. "You call it strength," Denzel said, pacing slowly now, "but what I see is noise. Loud isn't leadership. Threats aren't strategy. And when the country needed clarity, all you gave was chaos." Trump leaned into the podium, his voice lower, colder. "You think you're better than me? Just because Hollywood handed you a microphone?" "I didn't ask for a microphone," Denzel snapped. "But when the world is burning and the powerful keep pouring gas, I won't whisper." Trump chuckled dryly. Typical elite, lecturing people while hiding behind security gates and designer suits. Denzel's eyes narrowed. "I wear a suit so I'm not underestimated. You wear yours like armor. But no tailor in the world can hide a coward." That hit. The audience collectively gasped. Trump's fist tightened on the podium, but before he could launch back, Denzel pointed, not at Trump, but at the camera. "This isn't about me or him," he said to America. "This is about the country you wake up in every day. It's about the lies you've been sold in gold letters and cheap slogans. It's about a man who built towers, not communities. Who built walls, not bridges. And who built power, off your pain." A woman in the front row stood up and applauded. Then another. And another. Trump, now visibly sweating, gestured at the crew. Cut to commercial. The producer shook his head from the control booth. "The feed's live across 3 networks. There's no cutting now." Denzel turned back to Trump, his tone softer but sharper. "You ran a campaign on fear. But fear only works until someone stands up and says, 'We're not afraid anymore.'" Trump's face flushed. But the crowd, once his reliable source of control, was no longer with him. They weren't booing, but they weren't clapping either. They were watching. Waiting. And for the first time, the stage didn't feel like his. Trump forced a laugh, but it was hollow. The kind of laugh that echoed too long in a room that had already moved on. "You talk like you're some kind of savior," he sneered. "But you're just an actor. A man paid to pretend." Denzel didn't flinch. He stepped closer, not aggressive, but unwavering. "You're right. I do act. But I've spent my life embodying truth in stories. You? You've sold fiction as policy. Trump opened his mouth, but Denzel raised a hand. I've played corrupt kings, broken men, lost heroes. But even they had one thing you've never shown, remorse. The audience was hanging on every word now, not a cough, not a murmur, just an electric stillness. Denzel continued, locking eyes with the camera again. You had a chance to unite. To rise above your ego. But instead, you mocked the sick, caged the desperate, and turned a pandemic into a punchline. Trump's face twitched. I saved jobs. I protected borders. You protected yourself, Denzel cut in. You saved your image. And you let truth drown under applause. The moderators didn't dare intervene. The studio felt more like a courtroom than a stage, and Denzel wasn't just speaking, he was indicting. You made people believe decency was weakness, Denzel said, voice deep, nearly trembling with restrained fire. You made cruelty fashionable. But the thing about cruelty? It always comes back home. Trump stood, jabbing a finger toward Denzel. You're out of line. Denzel didn't move. No. I'm just not afraid of the truth. Gasps rippled through the audience. For the first time, Trump looked genuinely cornered, not by media, not by political opponents, but by moral gravity. Then Denzel turned again, this time to the viewers. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here because silence helps no one. If the emperor has no clothes, we say it. If the leader's just loud, we say that too. Trump's voice cracked as he tried to shout back. But the power had shifted. And the silence around him wasn't support, it was judgment. Trump leaned forward, both palms on the table, face flushed. You think the American people care what some Hollywood liberal says about me? You think they want lectures from someone who's never run a damn thing? Denzel didn't answer right away. Instead, he paced slowly, the lights above casting long shadows across the stage floor. The silence was deafening, and deliberate. Then he stopped. I don't need to run an empire, Denzel said, eyes fixed on Trump like a laser. Because I never wanted one. I've led with integrity, not intimidation. I've spoken truth, not sold it. Trump chuckled bitterly, trying to shrug it off. People love me, Denzel. That's why I win. That's why you perform, Denzel replied. You mistake applause for approval. They cheer your chaos because they're scared, confused, or just tired. But deep down, even your followers know, noise isn't leadership. The audience stirred. For the first time, even the die-hard Trump supporters in the crowd looked conflicted. You built towers, Denzel said, his voice lowering but tightening with purpose. I build stories. But stories live longer. Stories teach. Yours? Yours will be a cautionary tale. Trump scoffed. You're just one man. One man can change the weather, Denzel said, turning to the audience. But it's the storm that wakes people up. A hush fell over the room. Then, Denzel walked toward Trump, not aggressively, not threateningly, but with the calm confidence of a man who's seen behind the curtain. He leaned in, just enough for his final words to land like a verdict. History doesn't remember volume. It remembers vision. And with that, Denzel turned, nodded to the moderator, and left the stage. The camera stayed on Trump, red-faced, blinking, fidgeting with his cuffs. No words. No tweets. Just silence. And across the nation, millions sat in front of their screens, not clapping, not laughing, but thinking. This wasn't just another shouting match on live TV. It was a collision between legacy and truth. Between a man who craves applause, and one who commands respect. Denzel Washington didn't come to argue. He came to remind us that leadership isn't volume, it's vision. In a world where power often hides behind gold-plated lies. Sometimes, it takes one voice, calm, unshaken, to say, enough. So the next time someone tells you loud means right, remember what silence did tonight. This isn't the end. It's a shift. And history? It just took notes.